What if everything you thought you knew about this set was a lie? Behind the cameras, chaos was brewing, deadlines were missed, and one decision sent shockwaves through the entire production. Who really caused the delays? And why did the firing of a top assistant director change everything? Stay with me, because the truth about Blake Lively's set control and the hidden tensions that no one is talking about is about to be revealed. You're not going to believe what really happened behind the scenes. Something about this story never fully made sense from the very beginning, and the deeper you go, the more layers begin to appear, because what first looked like a routine production decision slowly transforms into a complicated chain of events that raises bigger questions about timing, responsibility, perception, and influence. And the entire situation begins quietly, with a staffing change that most audiences would never notice. Yet inside the film industry, a change like this is never small, because the first assistant director is not just another crew member. They are the heartbeat of the set, the person who keeps the day moving, the person who translates creative ambition into a real schedule, and the person who stands at the intersection of every department, making sure that hundreds of moving parts do not collapse into chaos. And when someone in that position suddenly leaves mid-production, it sends a ripple through every department, whether the public hears about it or not. And that ripple is where this story truly begins. Because the explanation that followed was simple at first, almost too simple. And simplicity is often where the most complicated stories hide. The first version suggested that the change was about performance and experience, and at face value, that sounds routine, because productions replace crew members all the time when the fit is not right. But the moment people began looking closer, the narrative began to shift, because the person at the center of the decision was not new, not inexperienced, and not unfamiliar with large productions. In fact, the opposite was true. The resume attached to this name stretched across decades of work, major productions, and television series that had required the exact skills that were now being questioned. And this is the first moment where curiosity turns into confusion, because if experience was not the issue, then what was? And that question becomes the thread that pulls everything else into focus, because as more testimony emerges, a pattern appears, not of a single moment or a single disagreement, but of a production struggling with time pressure, scheduling complications, and rising expectations, all happening at once. And when pressure builds on a production, it does not stay contained. It spreads quietly through call sheets, rehearsals, meetings, and conversations until eventually it surfaces in decisions that appear sudden from the outside but feel inevitable from within. And that is where the story becomes more complicated, because now we are not looking at a single decision. We are looking at a production environment where days were difficult to complete, schedules were shifting, and the challenge of staying on track was becoming harder with each passing week. And this is where competing perspectives begin to take shape, because on one side, the story describes a production environment where communication was not working, the schedule was slipping, and changes were necessary to keep the project moving forward. While on the other side, the same timeline can be viewed as a series of pressures that gradually built until a single decision became the outlet for a much larger problem. And what makes this moment so fascinating is that both perspectives can exist at the same time, because film productions are rarely simple. They are ecosystems built on collaboration, compromise, and constant adjustment. And when that balance shifts even slightly, the effects can be felt everywhere, from the earliest morning call times to the final shot of the day. And this is the part of the story where the tension truly begins to grow, because the decision to replace a key crew member does not happen in isolation. It happens after conversations, after concerns, after meetings that rarely appear in public, yet shape the course of a production behind the scenes. And once those conversations begin, they create momentum, and momentum on a film set can be powerful, because every day costs money, every delay affects the schedule, and every scheduling challenge adds pressure to everyone involved. And slowly, the conversation changes from what is happening to what needs to change. And when that shift occurs, the story moves from observation to action. And that is the moment where the narrative becomes impossible to ignore, because now the production is no longer just facing challenges, it is making decisions in response to those challenges. And those decisions begin to shape the story that the public will eventually hear. And this is where the timeline becomes critical, because the events do not happen all at once. They unfold over days and weeks as the production moves forward, while also trying to keep up with the demands placed upon it. And the longer the challenges continue, the more urgent the conversations become, because time on a film set is not flexible. Every day lost is a day that must be made up. Every delay must be accounted for, and every schedule change must be absorbed somewhere else in the production. And this creates a cycle where pressure builds quietly until it reaches a point where action feels necessary. And when that action happens, it can appear sudden from the outside, even if it felt gradual from within. And this is why the decision at the center of this story carries so much weight, because it represents the moment when quiet conversations turn into visible change. And once that change happens, the story begins to take on a life of its own, because now people begin asking questions, not just about what changed, but about why and how, and whether the change solved the problem it was meant to solve. And this is where the mystery deepens, because the production continued, the work continued, and yet the challenges did not immediately disappear, which introduces a new question that sits at the heart of the entire narrative. If the change was meant to fix the problem, why did the problem remain? And that question transforms the story into a puzzle that invites audiences to look closer, because the most compelling stories are rarely the ones with clear answers. They're the ones where every answer leads to another question, and every question reveals another layer. And as the layers continue to unfold, the story begins to shift from a single decision to a broader exploration of how productions operate under pressure, how narratives are formed, and how public perception can evolve alongside private decisions. And this is the moment where the audience becomes part of the story, because once a behind-the-scenes decision enters the public conversation, it no longer belongs solely to the production. It becomes a topic of discussion, interpretation, and speculation. And the more the story spreads, the more perspectives emerge, each one adding new context, new questions, and new interpretations, until the narrative becomes something larger than the event that started it. And this is what makes this moment so fascinating, because it's not just about a staffing change or a scheduling challenge, it's about how stories are built, how they grow, and how they continue to evolve long after the original decision has been made. And as we continue to look closer, the realization begins to take shape that this was never a simple story to begin with. It was a story waiting to be uncovered, piece by piece, moment by moment, until the full picture begins to appear. And even then, the picture may never feel complete, because the most intriguing stories are rarely end with certainty. They end with the understanding that there is always more beneath the surface, waiting to be explored. As the timeline moves forward, the story becomes more layered, and the focus begins to shift from the initial decision to the environment that surrounded it. Because productions do not exist in a vacuum. They operate under constant pressure from budgets, schedules, expectations, and the reality that every single day on set carries enormous cost and responsibility. And once the production began facing delays, the conversation naturally moved toward time, because time is the currency of filmmaking. Every hour lost becomes a problem that must be solved, and every missed day creates a ripple that travels through the entire schedule. And this is where the narrative begins to divide into different perspectives, because some accounts describe a set struggling to stay on track, while others describe the same period as a time of growing tension, where expectations and reality were no longer moving at the same pace. And this difference in perspective becomes important, because it shows how the same events can be interpreted in completely different ways, depending on where someone was standing when they experienced them. And when you begin to look at the details, a pattern begins to emerge, one where conversations about scheduling, communication, and workflow slowly become more frequent, more urgent, and more focused on finding solutions. And this is the stage where private discussions begin to shape public outcomes, because before any decision becomes visible, there are countless moments of concern, conversations about efficiency, meetings about timelines, and quiet attempts to adjust the course before larger changes become necessary. And this process is rarely dramatic from the inside. It is gradual, persistent, and shaped by the shared goal of keeping keeping the production moving forward. Yet, from the outside, these gradual steps can appear sudden and surprising, which is why the moment of change often feels larger than the events that led to it. And this is the space where uncertainty grows, because now the question is no longer just about what happened, but about what led to it. And the deeper the timeline is explored, the more it becomes clear that delays and scheduling challenges were not isolated incidents, but ongoing realities that required constant attention and adaptation. Because filmmaking is a process that depends on precision, planning, and flexibility at the same time. And when those two forces fall out of balance, the entire production begins to feel the strain. And that strain often reveals itself in small moments. First call times shifting, rehearsals taking longer than expected, scenes requiring additional preparation, and departments adjusting their plans to accommodate changing circumstances. And individually, these moments may seem routine, but collectively they create pressure that builds over time. And this is where the narrative becomes more complex, because pressure on a production does not belong to one person or one department. It is shared across the entire team. And when the pressure increases, everyone begins searching for ways to relieve it. And this search can lead to difficult conversations about efficiency, communication, and leadership, because the responsibility to keep the production on schedule touches every role, from performers to crew to producers. And once those conversations begin, they often lead to new questions about how the production can improve its workflow and where adjustments might be necessary. And this is the point where the story begins to feel less like a single event and more like a series of interconnected moments, each one contributing to the next, until the timeline becomes a chain of cause and effect that is difficult to separate into individual pieces. And as the production continues forward, the urgency of staying on schedule grows, because the longer delays persist, the harder they become to recover from, and the more creative solutions must be explored to make up lost time. And this environment creates a sense of momentum, where every decision carries weight, because it has the potential to affect not only the current day, but the entire schedule ahead. And when momentum builds in this way, the production reaches a turning point, where maintaining the current approach begins to feel less sustainable, and the idea of change becomes more appealing, because change offers the possibility of resetting the rhythm and restoring the balance that the production needs to continue. And this is the moment where discussions about improvement evolve into decisions about action. And once that transition happens, the story enters a new phase, because now the production is no longer just reacting to challenges, it is actively trying to reshape the path forward. And this shift changes how every earlier event is viewed, because it suggests that the decision at the center of the story was not an isolated response, but part of a broader effort to address ongoing challenges. And once this realization takes hold, the timeline becomes easier to understand as a progression rather than a single turning point, because each conversation leads to another, each adjustment leads to new expectations, and each decision creates new possibilities for how the production might move forward. And this progression highlights the reality that filmmaking is a collaborative process, shaped by constant adaptation and shared responsibility. And when that process faces obstacles, the solutions often emerge gradually through discussion, experimentation, and trial and error, rather than through a single dramatic moment. And this understanding changes the way the story feels, because it transforms the narrative from a sudden event into a gradual evolution, shaped by the pressures of time, expectation, and the desire to keep the project moving toward completion. And as this evolution continues, the focus shifts again from the decision itself to the results that followed, because once a change is made, the most important question becomes whether that change achieved its intended purpose. And this question introduces a new layer of curiosity
curiosity, because the production continued and the challenges did not immediately disappear, which suggests that the issues facing the production were more complex than any single solution could address. And this realization deepens the story by showing that the situation was not defined by one decision, but part of a broader effort to address ongoing challenges.
But by a series of efforts to navigate the unpredictable realities of filmmaking. And as the audience begins to understand this complexity, the story becomes more engaging because it reflects the truth that behind every finished film is a journey filled with adjustments, learning, and the constant pursuit of balance between creativity and practicality. And this is the point where the narrative truly expands, because now the conversation is no longer just about what happened, but about how productions adapt under pressure, how teams respond to challenges, and how the path to completion is rarely as straightforward as it appears from the outside. And this broader perspective transforms the story into something larger than a single moment, turning it into an exploration of the dynamics that shape every production and the decisions that help guide it from the first day of filming to the final day on set and beyond. As the story continues to unfold, the focus begins to shift from the immediate challenges of scheduling delays and production pressure to the broader implications of the decisions made and the way those decisions ripple through every layer of the set. Because in filmmaking, every choice has consequences that extend beyond the day it is made, and when a key crew member is replaced, the impact is not confined to one department. It travels through the cast, the crew, and the production leadership, creating a chain reaction that affects morale, workflow, communication, and ultimately the perception of how the project is being managed. And this is where the narrative becomes increasingly complex, because the simple explanation of performance or experience begins to fall apart when examined against the full timeline of events, and the testimonies provided by those present on set reveal a much more nuanced picture, one where competing perspectives intersect and diverge, creating a web of interpretations that each hold a piece of the truth. And the fascinating part of this web is how it highlights the intersection of influence, perception, and control. Because the person requesting the change was not a standard employee. She held a position that allowed her to shape aspects of the production in ways that most participants could not. And that level of involvement introduces questions about authority, responsibility, and the ways in which decisions are justified and communicated across the set. And when we examine the rationale behind the replacement of the assistant director, the story takes on new significance. Because on one hand, it was framed as a solution to a logistical problem, and on the other hand, the problem persisted even after the change, suggesting that the reasoning may have been more about perception, control, and alignment with leadership preferences than about actual operational efficiency. And this distinction is critical because it illustrates how narratives can be constructed to support a particular point of view, especially when those narratives are presented after the fact to justify actions and decisions. And in this context, the firing is not simply a staffing adjustment. It becomes a symbol of influence, a demonstration of the ability to navigate and manipulate the environment to align with personal and professional priorities. And this insight allows us to see how the story is not just about one production, but about the dynamics that exist in many high-pressure creative environments, where schedules are tight, budgets are monitored closely, and every decision is magnified under the scrutiny of stakeholders and observers alike. And as the timeline progresses, the ripple effect of this decision becomes clearer, because each subsequent challenge is now viewed through the lens of the earlier choice, and each delay, misstep, or perceived miscommunication is examined to determine whether it could have been prevented if a different approach had been taken. And this retrospective analysis highlights how difficult it is to untangle cause and effect in environments where multiple factors interact simultaneously. And when the testimonies are reviewed side by side, what emerges is a picture of a production navigating pressure, internal expectations, and public perception all at once. And this confluence of factors creates an environment where decisions are rarely simple and outcomes are rarely binary. And it is precisely this complexity that makes the narrative compelling, because it reflects the reality that behind every finished project, there is a network of human behavior, decisions, and interactions that shape the final product, often in ways that are invisible to the audience. And as the story continues to evolve, the replacement of the assistant director becomes a focal point for understanding these dynamics, because it is not simply a personnel change. It is an example of how influence is exerted, how perception is managed, and how narratives are constructed both internally and externally to justify choices and maintain control. And in this context, every interaction on set, every conversation about scheduling or workflow or creative direction takes on additional weight, because they are now part of a larger story about responsibility, leadership, and the management of complex collaborative projects. And as the narrative deepens, it becomes apparent that the persistence of delays and challenges, even after the change, underscores the fact that the underlying pressures of production cannot be solved solely through staffing decisions, and that the true complexity lies in the interactions of people with different priorities, expectations, and capacities, working together under constraints. And this realization adds a new dimension to the story, because it allows the audience to see the difference between action and outcome, between intention and result, and between perception and reality. And as these layers are revealed, the firing transforms from a single moment into a lens through which the entire production can be examined and understood, because it encapsulates the interplay of authority, influence, perception, and responsibility. And when viewed in this way, the narrative becomes not only a story about a single set or a single decision, but about the universal challenges of leadership, collaboration, and the navigation of high-pressure environments, where every choice carries weight and every consequence must be managed. And in this broader context, the firing serves as a microcosm of the production itself, reflecting the tensions, compromises, and strategic maneuvers that are required to keep a complex project moving forward. And it is precisely this complexity that engages the audience, because it invites them to consider not only what happened, but why it happened, how it was perceived, and what the outcomes reveal about the people and processes involved. And as the audience follows this thread, the story becomes more than a collection of events. It becomes a study of human behavior, organizational dynamics, and the ways in which control, perception, and influence shape outcomes in environments where stakes are high and the margin for error is small. And as the layers continue to unfold, it becomes clear that the narrative is far more than the sum of its parts, because each decision, each reaction, and each interaction contributes to a larger understanding of how a production functions, how tensions are managed, and how narratives are constructed, both in real time and in the aftermath. And this realization transforms the story into a rich and multi-dimensional exploration of the intersection of leadership, accountability, perception, and control in the context of a high-pressure creative project. And as the narrative continues to develop, every element of the production, from scheduling to casting to wardrobe to communication, becomes part of a larger tapestry, illustrating how individual decisions can reverberate throughout an organization, shaping outcomes, influencing perception, and defining the trajectory of a project in ways that are complex, nuanced, and endlessly compelling. And through this lens, the firing of the assistant director is no longer just a momentary event. It becomes a focal point for understanding the intricate and often hidden mechanisms that govern high-pressure collaborative environments, where the interplay of authority, influence, responsibility, and perception determines both the process and the outcome of the project. And as these mechanisms are revealed, the audience gains insight into the broader dynamics of leadership and collaboration, the pressures of time and budget, and the way human behavior interacts with structural systems to shape results in a way that is compelling, dramatic, and endlessly instructive about the realities of working in a high-stakes, professional, creative environment.
And in this way, the story transcends the particulars of one production to offer lessons, insights, and reflections about the nature of influence, decision-making, and accountability in any complex collaborative endeavor. And as the layers continue to be explored, the audience is left with a sense of both understanding and anticipation, because the implications of these decisions extend beyond the immediate circumstances, creating a narrative that is dynamic, layered, and impossible to ignore, while remaining rooted in the concrete realities of a production struggling to balance competing priorities and expectations under pressure. And as the narrative deepens even further, the story begins to weave together every moment, from initial concerns, discussions, requests for change, and the ultimate outcomes, illustrating how each piece fits into a broader mosaic that captures the full complexity, tension, and nuance of the environment in which these decisions were made. And as this mosaic becomes clearer, the firing serves as a central axis around which the story rotates, allowing the audience to trace the connections between cause and effect, intention and outcome, perception and reality, control and influence, responsibility and consequence, creating a deeply engaging narrative that holds the viewer at every stage, because it is at once dramatic, informative, and a window into the hidden dynamics that drive complex professional environments. And in this way, the story maintains suspense, tension, and intrigue as each detail reveals new insights, while keeping the audience invested in understanding how a single decision can resonate across an entire production, creating consequences, challenges, and lessons that extend far beyond the immediate moment into the broader context of creative collaboration, accountability, and leadership. And as the narrative continues to unfold, it maintains this careful balance of suspense, drama, insight, and complexity, ensuring that the viewer remains engaged from beginning to end, and the firing of the assistant director becomes emblematic not just of the situation at hand, but of the broader dynamics of influence, control, and responsibility that shape high-stakes productions in ways that are subtle, profound, and endlessly captivating. In conclusion, the story of the assistant director's firing and the surrounding production challenges exposes the intricate dynamics of influence, control, responsibility, and perception in high-pressure creative environments. What may appear from the outside as a simple staffing change is actually a window into how decisions are shaped by competing priorities, personal agendas, and the constant tension between schedules, budgets, and creative vision. This case highlights how delays and conflicts on set often result not from one person's failings, but from a complex interplay of human behavior, organizational structures, and environmental pressures. And the narrative demonstrates how those with influence can leverage situations to assert control, manage perception, and shape outcomes in ways that may obscure the underlying causes of problems. It also shows that even well-intended adjustments can fail to resolve the real issues when structural and behavioral challenges remain unresolved. And moreover, the testimonies and timelines reveal that accountability is often diffused in collaborative projects, and that actions taken to address one problem may create ripple effects that influence morale, workflow, and overall efficiency. The firing of the assistant director becomes emblematic of these broader dynamics, illustrating how perception and reality often diverge, how influence can be exercised strategically, and how narratives are constructed to justify choices and maintain control. Ultimately, the story serves as a lesson in leadership, collaboration, and the delicate balance required to navigate complex projects under pressure. It underscores the importance of transparency, accountability, and communication, while also offering a compelling and dramatic account of how high-stakes creative environments operate, and how human behavior interacts with structural systems to shape results in a way that is compelling, dramatic, and endlessly instructive about the realities of working in a high-stakes professional creative environment.